Welcome back to another episode of the Mindsets podcast. Today, I'm joined by Alex, who's going to take over and do a brief introduction of himself in a moment. However, I'm still your host. My name's Angus. It's a pleasure to have you guys back. I'm very excited for this episode today, actually. I think we're going to cover a lot of bases. Obviously, there's a lot that you have been through, and we will go through that. Not all positive, but I think where you're at now is a clear sign of the right direction. So everybody listening to this, I believe, is going to learn at least one thing, if not quite a few things from this. So massive thank you for coming on, but do take it away. Give a little introduction.
Thanks for having me, Angus. I appreciate it. You got to excuse my voice as well. I know I'm conscious it sounds like I've been eating sand. But yeah, I'm Alex Choi, 28 years old, living in London, and I work in tech sales, and I also resell watches.
Amazing. So that's a pretty niche thing that I do have questions about. But you're now in South London. Did you grow up in South London, or have you...
No, so I actually grew up in Eastbourne, so that's where everything started for me. So I was born in Haywards Heath, which is just down the road from Brighton, tiny little town, and then I moved to Eastbourne where the wider family lived when I was about 2. So I grew up there ever since. So I moved out of London when I was moved out of Eastbourne, sorry, when I was 18, then moved to London, and I've been here ever since in London.
What's Eastbourne as a well, what's it like to grow up as a place? It's like it's still on the coast and that sort of thing, so summer must be nice, going to the beaches.
It's a bit of a sleepy town, to be honest with you. I spent the majority of my time in Brighton, where there's a bit more going on. It is a retirement town. I mean, it's nice, and it's nice to be by the beach, but yeah, it was okay. It was all right. It was all right.
So, like, heading to Brighton, obviously, I'm fully aware that Brighton's a lovely place to spend a day. Well, I mean, no offense to anyone that lives in Brighton, I'm sure it's a lovely place to spend your time living there.
Yeah.
But in terms of things to do, I'm aware when you were younger, you had some relatively early involvement in sport.
Yep.
What sports did you get into first?
So I went into Taekwondo first. So I'm half Chinese, half English. So grew up around martial arts, being obsessed with Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, all the old school Kung Fu movies. So I was a very, very shy kid as well. I was a very, very anxious kid growing up. So I think my parents could recognize that from when I was quite young. So because of that, they wanted me to kind of come out of my shell a little bit more. So they decided, to send me Taekwondo. Started that when I was 6. Did that from when I was 6 to 16. And then I was competing, got black belt in Taekwondo. And then from 16 to about 22, I then took up Muay Thai, which is a little bit more intense. And yeah, it was a really good time, really good time.
So again, treat me like an idiot. Some people would agree I am one. So the differences in martial arts.
Yeah.
So in the 4th episode of the Mindsets podcast, I met a guy out in Bali who was training Muay Thai.
Yeah.
And he also gave me a bit of a lesson, which was really painful on my shins.
Yep.
But what are the main differences between things like karate and taekwondo and judo for those that aren't so in touch with it?
Yeah, so judo is more about throwing your opponent down. Taekwondo and karate is more about striking. But there's a big focus on doing things called katas in karate, for example, and then patterns in Taekwondo, which is basically a set series of movements that you do, which you perform, right? Muay Thai is specifically for sparring. So there aren't any katas or patterns. Everything that you do is for the purpose of getting into the ring and beating your opponent.
Okay, mad. So Taekwondo, what age did you start that at?
I started at 6. Yeah.
One thing that I always found interesting, so my dad actually tried to get me into a bit of karate when I was younger, and I loved it, but I never got that far into it. But what I could see is that martial arts have always got a bit of a lifestyle or understanding of oneself attached to it.
Yep.
Is that something that you noticed from quite a young age as you're learning the martial art and you're learning physical control of your body, that it starts to get a bit mental with the coaches and dealing with pain? Obviously you're going to have to in something, a fighting sport.
Yeah.
Is that something that you were kind of coached through, or just kind of adapt, or did you not experience any of that at all?
Yeah, so I was absolutely coached through that, and I think from a disciplines perspective as well, there's no other better thing that you can do, in terms of trying to control your body and control your mind, because both those things are intrinsically linked, right? So I was able to gain a lot more control over myself when I started doing that. I was able to come out of my shell a lot more as well. So it's really fundamental in my personal development growing up as a kid.
And what's it like being in school? How old were you when you got your black belt?
I was 16.
So what's it like being in school and like having a black belt? Because to me, I remember a couple of people that I knew had a black belt at that age, and I was genuinely like they would never have been told by me, but I was terrified of them. Like at any moment, like you just have utmost control over me and there's nothing I can do about it.
I went through a lot of bullying as a kid growing
Really?
up. Yeah. So I had a lot of problems. So because I was half Chinese and half English, growing up in a small seaside town, it's a very sleepy town, and just generally speaking, there's a big culture of people who were born in that town, they stay in that town forever, right? So what comes with that is that kind of small town mentality, right? So growing up, I was very, very different. So I had a lot of problems at school because of that. So yeah, having a black belt did serve me fairly well to being able to stand up for myself, for sure.
So I think bullying is a bit of a wild thing because there's all these things in place at schools to deal with it. But to an extent, it's a relatively easy to fail system because you never really like bullying is there's degrees to bullying. Like having a bad day or having someone pick on you on one day is still bullying, but it doesn't seem necessarily worth getting everyone involved for the one event that it happens. But then someone also that has been bullied for 6 months might be like, oh, it's only been going on for 6 months. It's quite a rough thing. How did you find that would impact you sort of in your general life? And obviously going to school daily is a massive thing for everyone. So how did that sort of affect you in your sort of social relationships and that sort of thing when you were younger?
It affected me a lot, massively, because the bullying kind of stemmed around the fact that I was different. So one of the biggest things that I've had growing up is being too Chinese to be in the UK, but then because I'm half white, when I go back over to Hong Kong, I'm too white to be Chinese, right? So I always had that kind of I felt lost. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere, you know? So that's something that really affected me going into school and being constantly reminded that actually I was different. You know, I felt like I didn't fit in with the other kids, and that was made apparent every single day. So, you know, it really affected, you know, the way that you carry yourself. You know, if you're being bullied, you're being reminded that you're different from everybody else, the whole aura that you have about yourself is, you know, it changes.
And did you find that all faded away when you got into your training?
Yeah, momentarily, but then, you know, training doesn't last forever, right? And you have to go back into school. So yeah, it absolutely helps. I think exercise is a really positive outlet to take out frustration or to take your mind off of things. So it did, but then, you know, like I say, I had to go back to school the next day, and it just continued, and it was bad. It was bad growing up.
Did it kind of all come to an end because school ended and you moved on, or was it something that fizzled out?
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good question. So when I moved to college, that was it was a college which attracted other kids from different areas, right? So it was a bit more multicultural. So then I started to really gel with people and bond with other people. Then it got better when I was at university as well. Coming to uni in London, you know, there's people from all parts of the world, right? London's a cultural melting pot. So it got better as I got older, for sure.
Okay, and what was the sort of reason that you went away from being, I mean, I don't want to sound like Jay from the In-Betweeners. You got a black belt in Taekwondo, you completed it. Was that the reason that you then looked on to another martial art?
Yeah, so I wanted something a bit more intense. So obviously they do a bit of sparring in Taekwondo, but I wanted something that was just a next level above that. So that's why I decided to go into Muay Thai. It's, in my opinion, it's just a level a bit more difficult. And I wanted to be a bit more focused on the sparring. I wasn't so interested in doing the patterns. So it just made more sense to go into that. And
So what's the difference in training like? So, I mean, a typical training session or what does typical training look like for Taekwondo versus Muay Thai?
So a Muay Thai training is, I would say, a lot more intense. The intensity is a lot higher. So it's usually about 45 minutes to an hour on pads, straight, no breaks. And then typically we would go into another hour of sparring straight after. So yeah, it's hard work, really hard work. Taekwondo is it's a little bit more relaxed, I think, in my opinion.
Okay, is one of them more technique based than the other, would you say?
I would say that they're both technique based, but in a different way, right? So yeah, I think that there's an element of you know, importance on technique in both of them.
And did you do martial arts through university?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Were you trying to represent, or did you represent the university?
I did.
Doing them?
I did indeed. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
How did that all go?
It was good. It ended a bit abruptly. I don't want to go into too much detail.
Sure.
But someone got a bit hurt. So yeah, accidentally, because it's a dangerous sport. You know, you just hit someone the wrong way, and you know, something can happen. Something bad can happen. So yeah, it was good whilst I was doing it there, but it was more intense when I was training back home in Eastbourne, and then after university as well, I trained in London with Team Chu in Holborn.
Okay, amazing. And I'm aware, because we've had a bit of a brief discussion beforehand, that you know, you were doing this martial arts training, and training for you was, you know, part of your life that was a good thing. It kept everything balanced. And then some things changed. It kind of, I think things change is a good way to open it up. But do you want to talk me through into kind of what happened and how life started to change a little bit?
Yeah, 100%. So my dad's a complicated character. He went through a lot growing up. He was born in Hong Kong, no running water, no electricity, and he went through unimaginable hardship. So my grandma had him about 19, 20 before, no, maybe a little bit older than that. She had my 3 aunties before she had my dad. She was doing all sorts of odd jobs in Hong Kong. By that point that my dad was born, my grandfather had already moved over to the UK to do all sorts of odd jobs over the country with the idea to move the family over. So when my dad was 8, like I said, my grandfather had already left. And that's when my grandma had decided to then leave the kids in Hong Kong and then come over to the UK as well. So my grandfather and my grandmother, they're living separately all over the UK, doing all sorts of odd jobs. So, you know, having that separation from your parents is going to have a massive impact on you, right? And so he went through loads of hardship when he was living in Hong Kong. And then eventually when he came over here, it was tough growing up over here as well. You know, cultural identity, back then racism was worse than it is now, I think. So he went through a lot, and he carries a lot of that trauma with himself. And as a result of that, I think a lot of that has been passed down. You know, it takes a lot to try and break that generational trauma. And he wasn't given the opportunity to do that. You know, mental health wasn't a thing back in that day, right? So he finds himself, it's very difficult for him to talk about the way he feels. And yeah, he's got a lot of different problems, you know. So growing up, I used to lock heads with my dad a lot. You know, there are a lot of problems back home. And yeah, and it was difficult. I think having the cultural differences I experienced as well, where I'm born in the West, so I've got a massive Western influence, but then my dad is a very old school Chinese guy, you know, so discipline, just getting on with it, not talking about the way that you feel, very, very harsh on the children, doesn't believe in praise and that sort of thing, because he always wants you to exceed expectations, doesn't want you to get complacent. So a lot of that made me question my self-worth. You know, I felt like I was never good enough. No matter what I did, I always wanted to win dad's affection, but he would never really give that to me. Whereas my mum, on the other hand, she was a lot more nurturing, a lot more caring. You know, she would, you know, she'd just be a normal parent, I guess, if you want to say it like that. So yeah, it was tough growing up, and my grandma is my hero. So that's another part of this story as well. The hardship that she endured to be where she ended up being in the last stages of her life was just incredible. So she's got a real rags to riches story. She was born in China. Her story is that she had to walk from China to Hong Kong when she was about 8 years old during the Second World War.
Damn.
Yeah, and it was her job to herd all of the cattle over from China over to Hong Kong when bombs were dropping in fields, and she just said it's just unimaginable struggle. Lost her dad along the way, so she moved over with her mum, and then yeah, like I say, she's doing all sorts of odd jobs all over this country, in Hong Kong, and then came over here and doing all sorts of odd jobs over this country. Saved up enough money to open up their own Chinese takeaway in Eastbourne, put all their money together, and that initially failed. For a number of years, that wasn't doing very well, and my grandma used to say, she used to tell me about how affected she was by the fact that they had put all of their money into this business and it wasn't working out, and then stuck at it for a few more years, kept on doing it, and then it was a success, and then built a basically property empire as well after. So I just I listened to her story, and I often think to myself, you know, there are times when I feel tired, I can't be bothered to work, and I just think that the job that I have and the life that I have is such a luxury compared to what my grandmother had to go through. I can't even imagine, you know, what that feels like. I've never had struggle like that, you know. So I think to myself, when I'm tired, you know, I think of that little 5'0" woman, and it powers me through to make me want to work harder and be better. And that's where I think I get my drive from. My parents also had a food business as well in Eastbourne, like I mentioned. And I think just tying back into that idea of hard work and being self-motivated, the fact that my parents never gave me anything. So I remember being as young as like 4 years old, I used to walk into my parents' shop and, you know, like a kid would. I've got my hand out asking for money for sweets, right? My parents would teach me that if I want money, then I have to go and do something for it. So I always had that drive, and I always had that, I don't know, I don't like that word, entrepreneurial spirit, I guess, but I always made something happen for myself. So yeah, I've always been fairly driven, always been found ideas to make money and do things for myself. And so yeah,
I think one thing that's quite interesting about that is obviously not being given things is a great way to like drive and learn how to get things as well. One thing that I've always found quite difficult is my family, even in particularly hard times, have always like made sure that we will offer each other whatever we can. And my mum is fantastic at it. She'll be like, look, if ever you need anything, you can always ask, like we'll make it work, like everything like that, which I massively appreciate. But at the same time, I hate it. And I don't know if this is like a personal pride thing, and it probably will someday get me in trouble. But like I refuse that help massively, because in the same way that you have learned and experienced, I know that for me to actually learn how to do things properly, I need there to be like, it's that or nothing. Yeah. Not it's that or I can go and ask for some help. I need to cut those ties, which again is really difficult. And I know if my mum's listening to this, I know you struggle with the fact that I just reject the help. But like ultimately that's why, is because I have seen from other people the benefit that it does provide to have that extra push. Yeah. And ultimately that's what I try to bring into a lot of things I do, and that's my motivation as well. I think it's also amazing that you have someone in your life that has got such a crazy story of hardship and that sort of thing. So I find it incredibly inspirational. And I want to know, how do you tie that to the individual things that you're doing? So like you're now into, you said trading watches and that sort of thing. Yeah, yeah. So obviously I'm aware, I've seen this guy on TikTok whose name I can't remember. Yeah. That is a massively like, everything comes from your own action in that role. So like finding someone to sell the watch to, finding the actual watch, finding the quality, getting all the papers and all the boxes as well adds value as far as I'm aware. Again, I'm not a pro of this. But it's so self-driven. And I think that clearly comes across as why you lean on that story. Is it's such a self-driven story as well. I am actually interested, what has sparked your interest into that industry?
It's a good question. So it actually all started when I first saw my grandfather wearing a Rolex. So when he first made a bit of money in the UK, it was a real, sense of status for him to buy that specific model that he had. And I can still remember it now. I was as young as, I must have been maybe 4 or 5 years old. And then he had his arm hanging over the sofa. And I remember seeing that watch and being so fascinated with that specific watch. I remember saying to myself, when I'm older, I want to buy granddad's watch. I want to buy a watch just like granddad's. So I had that interest in watches since then. But it all started from when I was, so as a kid, I was buying and I was that kid at school buying and selling, cans of drink and sweets and selling them at school. And again, I think I got that entrepreneurial spirit from watching my mum and dad be in business for themselves, and then my grandparents as well. So it was just something which was instilled in me. So then with the money that I got from school doing that, I then, when I got to college, was buying and selling trainers. And then from there, I started to realize you can make money from watches as well. So I bought my first watch, made a bit of money on it, and thought, okay, I can do something with this. So then from there, it just continued really. And I've been doing it ever since.
That's really cool. It's quite a niche thing as well to do as a job. Now, one of the things I want to lean on is it seems that a lot of this, and we've spoken about the drive, comes from your nan's story. And to my knowledge, she's not with us today.
No, she's not.
And that's something that has massively affected you as well. Yeah. So you spend quite a lot of time with her.
Absolutely.
So there's a bit of a story attached to that as well, isn't there? Do you want to take us through it a little bit?
Yeah, 100%. So you're right, I was super attached to my grandma. So when my parents initially were starting up their business, that kind of took priority. I was just born basically. So my grandma was the one who basically looked after me and helped to raise me. So she always used to affectionately tell this story about the fact that, I don't know if it's true, but I was speaking Chinese before I was speaking English because I spent so much time with my grandma. So as well, for right or wrong, the son is the favorite in the family, right? It's not a good thing, but because I was the son of the son, I was always the blue-eyed boy. So my relationship with my grandma was super, super special. So she was always so proud of me. The only thing that she ever wanted me to do was to do work in an office job or do something which wasn't manual labor, because when she was in Hong Kong, she was bricklaying, she was farming, selling vegetables, you know, doing back-breaking work. So she only wanted me to do something better, if you want to call it better. So that relationship with my grandma was super, super strong. You know, from the day that I was born, she was looking after me. So I always say that she was our mum and dad wrapped in one. And yeah, you know, watching her be so proud of me as I went through school and, you know, get good grades, because she was so, that's the only thing she wanted me to do, get good grades and focus on school, go to university. She was, you know, absolutely obsessed with me doing that. So watching her be so proud of me when I was doing fairly well at the time was, yeah, really special.
Yeah. And as that, as that sort of relationship had to fade, given with circumstances, I'm aware that things kind of start to go off the rails a little bit.
Yeah.
And you, I guess the generic term would be you lose yourself a little bit. So what was that journey? Obviously I'm glad that you're here and you're not there anymore, but what was that journey?
So I think that it was a combination of the stuff that I went through with my dad being so difficult growing up with my dad, and then the bullying, like I explained at school, the cultural identity crisis, if you want to call it that. But then a lot of it comes from the build up to my grandmother's death. So I think I was 20 at the time, and my grandmother by that point had bought the house next door to us, so she was right next to us, and she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and it's a really quick decline, really, really quick. So at that point when all of that was happening, she started to get jaundice, and she got very, very ill quickly. And to this day, I don't know why my family had decided to do this, but she didn't speak English, but she knew the word cancer. So she knew something was going on with her because she could see her skin change. She could see that she was losing weight. But my family decided not to tell her yet that she had cancer. And by this point, we knew that she didn't have very long to live. So naturally, with my grandmother living next door to us, I took it upon myself with, you know, my sister, mum and dad to be her caregiver, you know, to look after her, which is so difficult because, you know, to think this is a woman that basically brought me up, and she was the strongest woman that I knew. Her mindset was like no other, you know, so resilient, so driven. She, you know, the story that I just told you is so inspiring. And then to watch her rapid decline and, you know, me having to take her to the bathroom, having to feed her, it was so difficult to see that and to live through that. You know, I'm 20 years old at the time as well. It was the summer of my second year. I was working at my parents' place. I had another job as a language school leader, and I was also having to be her caregiver. So it was so difficult to balance all of those things. I'm 20 years old, you know, and at 20, I was a very immature 20-year-old. So I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to do the best thing that I can do, right? But yeah, watching her decline and get seriously ill was it was tough, and it's just a bit of it was a whirlwind at the time, you know. I was just like, what is going on? It was almost like I wasn't processing it at the time. Now, I remember one really upsetting moment when it was my cousin's wedding, and I remember sitting on the stairs with her, and there was a picture that was taken of me by the photographer, and you can see in my eyes how distraught I am, because it was moments before that my grandmother said to me, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I know that something's ill. I know that I'm ill, sorry. But this is the happiest day of my life for my cousin's wedding, but I just want to live long enough to see you get married. And that was so difficult for me to hear, because by that point I had already known that she only had a few months to live. So having that guilt that I carried with me, knowing that she didn't know that, is something which still almost haunts me to this day. And then leading on from there, a few weeks after, she started to get really ill and things really started to take a turn. So I remember, and this is a really traumatic memory, but this is a point when my grandmother was completely bedbound. So she was laying on the side of her pillow like that. And this eye by that point had permanently closed. And I just remember getting on my knees, and I was apologizing to her that she was going through this and she was in so much pain. I was just, you know, hysterical. And I remember when I saw her tear roll down the side of her face, my mum said to me, you know, don't be upset, be pleased and be happy and be proud, because this might be the last time that she's ever going to be able to see, you know. So it would have been the last thing that she ever saw. And she was right. You know, after that, both of her eyes closed, and, you know, she was still alive, but barely. You know, the day was looming. And a few days after that, I could lose track of, you know, timelines, but like I say, it was a big blur. But it was soon after that that I then walked into the house and I found her passing away. And that was something which was completely...
That's something that no one
traumatic.
Can prepare anyone for. Like,
yeah.
I fortunately have not had to walk in on that, and I'm aware that even those in the health professionals and walk into a room, yes, they're somewhat desensitized to it. Yeah. But having spoken to a few people in my family that work in and have had to go in and announce someone has passed away, there's still an element of you that it's new every time. It's raw every time. And especially, like you said, as a 20-year-old kid, you know, that must have been a huge, like, almost slap in the face. Yeah. You're just not ever going to be ready for that. And so I can imagine that sort of thing would have quite a lasting impact on you. Is that right?
Absolutely, 100%. I just, you know, the image, what I saw on that day still, you know, really bothers me to this day, and I don't think that's ever going to change. You know, holding someone's hand as they're passing away and feeling them go cold, you know, it's something that I hope nobody has to experience. And then I just remember being in such a state of shock, calling the doctor pronouncing her dead, and then that was it. And then I couldn't believe what was going on, you know. Like I say, in the months leading up to that and me looking after her, my dad wasn't, let's just say, being the most supportive person with that as well. Couldn't get anything right. I couldn't get anything right. So there's a lot of blame, I feel, and a lot of responsibility, you know, on myself, and making me feel like I wasn't doing enough. Yeah. Which made that whole process even worse. And like I say, when she actually passed away and I called the doctor, I was in such shock that I went to work the next day. I didn't cry. I didn't process it. It took me years to process that. So I remember going into work, and then at the time, the language school that I was working for was aware that what was going on at home, and they asked about her. And I remember just saying, oh yeah, she died last night. And just seeing the shock on their faces made me realize how much I just didn't process it. The only thing that I remember thinking when she passed away in front of me was saying to myself that my life is going to be different forever. And I knew that my life would be different. And then it was from there, I went back to uni after the summer, and I just went completely, absolutely off the rails. Absolutely uncontrollably off the rails for quite a while. It was chaos. I was chaos. Yeah, I had no control. And it's funny because I wasn't making this conscious decision to tell myself, I feel like that. I've seen all of that stuff, everything that's happened growing up as a kid, problems with my dad, that now I'm going to go wild. But I just did, because must have subconsciously made me forget about what was going on, right? And then that got really, really out of control, and I completely lost my way.
And is that in terms of, you know, discovering new things to try that maybe aren't so healthy?
yeah, absolutely. You know, going out drinking, everything that comes with drinking, and that party lifestyle, if you want to call it that. And this is the thing, I was masking it as, you know, going out and partying. You know, I was always known as the wild one at university, right? But now I look back, I wasn't doing it for a happy reason. You know, I wasn't doing it because I was having loads of fun, I don't think. I was doing it because I needed to shut, you know, that alarm going off in my brain, that anxiety in my brain. So yeah.
And that's quite a tough thing, obviously, with the mental side of things. You can, to a degree, lie to yourself, but you can lie to other people. But at the end of the day, you just can't lie to yourself. And so that alarm where you're trying to shut it off, you'll shut it off until you wake up feeling atrocious the next day.
Yep.
And if you manage to do it, you'll try and go again before the alarm chimes in. But then there's only so long that you can keep going out and partying before it all catches up to you. And it's 10 times worse. So that's how a negative spiral happens, which I get the impression is what you started to go through a little bit. then you get to the complications of not having your self-worth anymore, which is something that you developed through, you know, your youth, and you had struggles with bullying and that sort of thing in school. But then as you got older and you got past that, you said, you know, you started to develop some self-worth, you know, things were starting to look more improved from that point, and then it's just suddenly spiraled downhill. How far did it go before we started to think, or we started to find a way to turn around?
I hit complete rock bottom. So when you live that kind of lifestyle, you completely change as a person. You know, physically, mentally, you're not the same person as you once were. All of the chemicals in your brain are completely messed up. Everything's out of whack, right? You start behaving differently, and it's evident. And then it was going on for such a long time that eventually I tried to do something stupid. And I'm grateful for the person who managed to help me with that. And thankfully, you know, I didn't go through and do what I thought I needed to go and do, because that would have been, you know, a completely stupid thing to do. So I'm pleased I didn't, but that was my rock bottom moment. And it was from there, I literally looked at myself in the mirror and I said, is this what it's going to be forever? You know, you didn't used to be like this. You're an adult now. You know, we can heal that inner child. We can heal all of that trauma through going to therapy, through doing exercise. But is this what it's going to be? You know, is this all I want to reduce myself down to? Or do you want to change and be better? And, you know, the only way was up. You know, they often say that you will only change if the pain of remaining the same is greater than the pain of changing. And so for me, I just decided I wanted more for myself. You know, I knew that I was a good person. The things that I was doing weren't amazing. I was getting into trouble as well. You know, I was completely different to what I am now. I think I've got a relaxed, level-headed person, driven, and, you know, I think I've got a lot of positive attributes. But yeah, I was nuts. I was just doing absolutely mad things. Completely lost that sense of self.
So did therapy came in kind of as probably one of the earlier things that you turned to?
No, it wasn't. That's only something I've been doing recently. Yeah.
Okay. So what was the initial driving change?
It was exercise. It was getting back into the gym. So I'd always consciously noticed when I was exercising, I'm eating well. When I was eating well, I was drinking loads of water. When I was drinking loads of water, you know, it's a snowball effect of positivity. My relationships were good with people because I felt better within myself. And that's the opposite for the other lifestyle I was living. You know, when you feel shit about yourself, when you're not eating properly, when you're not training, it has the complete opposite effect, right? So yeah, that was something that I noticed. And I've always gone through that cycle of living really healthily and then going nuts, and then living healthily and thinking to myself, oh, well, I'm fine again now. And then going, oh, well, we'll do a night out, we'll do whatever. And then it just spirals again. So I've done that cycle so many times. I just got sick of living in that, you know, perpetual cycle of, you know, never ending cycle of feeling great and then feeling like shit. So then I started to really take exercise a lot more seriously, making it, you know, a real part of my identity and really linking that to the values I have as a person, like I did when I was a kid doing all the martial arts. And I've just been I've been in a positive cycle ever since. And that's a point, you know, that I never want to go back to.
So with the training that you got into, you didn't get back into martial arts. Was it more towards gym-based movements?
Yeah.
And what was the reason for that? Was it just because it was more accessible, or you didn't really want to go back into martial arts?
I didn't want to go back into martial arts because the Muay Thai training was so intense. I was having all sorts of cuts and bruises, broken noses on my face. So by that point, I already had a corporate job. It's a client-facing role as well. So turning up looking like I've had a scrap in a pub on a Friday night at work is probably not a good look. So I decided to go into the gym instead. Obviously, I met yourself through High Rocks. The gym was it's great, and that's something which has always made me feel better as a person. And, you know, like we can agree, your mental health and physical health are both intrinsically linked, right? So I always felt good after I hit the gym, and I just told myself that that's how I wanted it to remain. So that's what I started doing. But then I started doing High Rocks classes, which is obviously where I met yourself, just so I could have a bit more social interaction. And I wanted to build an environment of positive people. You know, I didn't want to be in the same sort of friendship circles as I once had before. I wanted to build an environment where I was meeting like-minded people like yourself.
I think that's one of the scary things as well. Whenever you go to do something new like that, is if you're a person that's like, oh, I need to go to the gym more, I need to do this. The gym's great for the same reasons where we said our mental and physical health are linked, but if you don't bring in the social side, it can get really draining and it can get really lonely. It can get really boring. But if you have the ability to make it social, whether you bring one friend every once in a while or whether there's a group of people and you can go and do a thing. And to be honest, I never thought I'd get into anything like IROX. I think I've made that clear on this podcast before, but it's the people. Like every week when everyone turns up, it's just a good time. And it's, for me, it's not even really going to the gym. Like, yes, I guess I'm going and I'm doing a workout, but it's more just the chance to catch up with people. Everyone turns up at the end of their week, whether it's been a good week or a bad week, and 35 to 40 minutes later, whatever that week was has melted away and everyone's on a good level. And like generally we're all agreeing that we're absolutely fucked. And that's a good place to be. It's hard work. It's a good place to be. And I think that's one of the things that I got through doing this and meeting different people. And it's also made me massively more comfortable in situations where I don't know people. Because if you're able to rinse yourself in front of strangers and be a sweaty mess, then all of a sudden, when it comes to things like on a day-to-day life where you need to introduce yourself to someone and you don't look like a sweaty mess and you're not absolutely dead, it's not as hard.
100%.
So that's one of the things I think obviously based on the fact that you're now still in, I guess, customer-facing, client-facing roles, one quote that I've heard is, what is the best thing you can do for your fashion sense? And no matter what your goal is, it's to work on your physical appearance towards that. And so for some people that might mean going to the gym, for some people that might not at all, but ultimately that's the best thing you can do for your fashion is look good in you, because then whatever clothes go on top just becomes an accessory to you. And so that's something that I can imagine if you went from the sort of depths of rock bottom to coming back, building yourself to a point where you can look at yourself in the mirror and go, hey, you know, there's some real improvement there.
Absolutely.
It's something that's quite driving. And again, you spoke about this cycle. It's building the cycle and the habits, and also understanding that it's not always going to be positive upwards in that sense. Like you are still going to have days when you look in the mirror or you look at what you're doing in your life and be like, ugh. But it's just understanding that, yes, that happens. And the only way to reduce that happening is by continuing regardless of that. And just keeping going, sticking at it, making sure you're still having those interactions, making sure you're still pushing yourself in each thing, because you'll have those bad days a third of the time. You'll have okay days a third of the time. And you have great days a third of the time. Just remembering that if you're having one bad day, that just means you've got one okay day and one good day coming in that view. And I think that's where everything starts to tie into each other, which I think you're a walking example of, which is great. And I think I've had a few questions from people. So this is a good time to bring it in. So for those who aren't aware, there are listener questions. So before a guest comes on, I like to put out a bit of information about the person. And it's an opportunity for you guys to ask questions. You can ask them anonymously to maybe get some advice from someone who's been through something that you've gone through or has gone through something that you may one day go through. So this first question is from Amelia. She said, based on that rough period of time, if there was some addiction involved in certain things, how did the addiction affect your relationships and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, like I said, when you go through a period like that, you completely change as a person. So you don't really care about other people. You know, you're more closed off. You behave differently. You don't have empathy or as much emotion, right? So, of course, they were considerably worse. Right? I didn't love myself. And if you can't love yourself, you can't love other people. So that's bound to have a negative effect on the relationships that you have and on people that you care about, right? So, yeah, I think that's really impacted my relationships with other people, for sure.
And so focusing on yourself a little bit more to give yourself more value and then bring that to other people.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head a second ago as well when you said, you know, because I looked like shit during that period. So when I was looking in the mirror, I wasn't someone that I looked proud of. You know, I wasn't proud of myself, the way that I lived. You know, I didn't look like a healthy person. So when I started to live more healthily, go to the gym, eat better, and I started to look physically better, that's then had a positive effect on mental health as well. So
awesome. And the next question is anonymous. Did you train very differently before? So when you were getting into the gym at the end of this, did you train very differently to how you train now?
Yeah, I think I use all of those negative experiences that I've had growing up as fuel and as a fire. Yeah, that I use, to train super hard, super disciplined. So before, when I was doing, Muay Thai and Taekwondo, it's more just about having fun. I don't really have fun in the gym now, but I know it's a necessity. So I think I train a lot more intensely now. But yeah, I use all of those negative experiences as fuel.
And how have you found the switch to going away from martial arts to now more gym-based functional movement?
Yeah, I like it. It's got its pros and cons. When I was doing the martial arts before, it was very, very social as well. I feel like I was a lot more fit from a cardio sense, but now I've got into high rocks. Obviously, that's changing. But I like the gym because I can just lock in. I like to have my headphones in. I can completely just shut out and just focus on what I need to do. So yeah, I like them both.
Okay, solid. And the last question is, what thing makes you get up and get going when nothing else wants you to? We've kind of covered this. There's obviously this story that you've got from your grandparents. But in terms of like one specific thing, so if it's a song or like a thing that you do, whether it's like, I don't know, shotgun a monster or something like that. But what's the thing that you rely on to get you going?
It's thinking about my grandma. Thinking about my grandma because she had such a tough upbringing and her story and everything. She didn't have time to be tired. So I've got a nice warm flat. I've got a good job. I'm clothed, I'm fed. So if I find myself being tired, I remind myself of what that lady went through, and I remind myself of that, and remind myself of what a luxurious life I live in comparison to what she went through. That's enough fuel to get me up and going.
Amazing. So there's another section that I like to do on this podcast, which is a 3 bits of advice section. So if I was to lock you in this room and it wasn't me sitting here, it was a younger version of you. Now, because it's 3 bits of advice, they don't all need to be the same age, but what piece of advice would you give your younger self?
I would tell myself to be patient and to be kind to myself. Everything's going to be all right. And to keep on exercising and to talk about how I feel and be open. Don't trap him.
Okay, that's good, solid advice. 3 quick ones, and I like it. It's quite difficult when you think about a young version of yourself, what you would actually say. It's quite easy to be like, well, I got here, I want that person to go through that. But at the same time, it's quite easy to overdo it and think way too deeply. But sometimes 3 quick words to ring true. And it sounds like those are things that you think about now on a daily basis as well.
Absolutely.
Now, there's also a previous guest question. So the last guest we had on was Hercules. And his question was, if you could go back in time to a specific moment that you could relive, what moment would that be and why?
It would be the day that I got my first year uni results and my grandma was waiting in anticipation for what those results would be. And I got 2-1 this is my first year. So it wasn't my final grade. I did get a 2-1 in the end, but she was just absolutely ecstatic because my dad he messed up college, he messed up his degree. So she didn't want me to do the same thing. So it was seeing how proud she was, and that just gave me an immense sense of joy. So to see that expression on her face, to see how elated she was, that was a good day.
That's really nice. So what's the question you're going to ask for the next guest, not having a clue who they are?
Great question. What is the impact that getting involved in sports has had on your mental health? Is that a good one?
Yeah,
okay.
That's a good
question. Right?
Yeah. That's solid. So for anyone listening to this that wants to know the answer to that question, check it out in the next episode, where we will be opening up the floor for more of your own personal questions as well, of course. But that slightly ties us up towards the end of this one, and we've gone through so much, and you've opened up so much, and I think it's very, very difficult to talk about those things, let alone come onto a podcast and talk about them. But I think doing things like this really shows people that will listen that it's okay to open up. Ultimately, as much as it feels like, there could be hundreds of people listening to this, it is you and I in a room at the moment. And for the people that are listening to this that find it difficult to open up about things, find a room where it can just be you and one other person and talking about it can make it so much better. So thank you for being an example of that. Now, I'm aware that you're doing a fantastic thing coming on, as I've just said there. Is there anything that you would like to mention that you're currently working on, or of yourself, where people can find you?
I'm not. There's nothing I need to plug, I'll be honest.
Okay, no worries at all. So nothing needs to plug, but as we move forward, obviously, I have one more question for you that's directly out of my interest. Okay, I think I know the answer to this. If you hadn't got anything in terms of watches, and tomorrow you woke up to a box that was wrapped up, would you hope that there was a top level Garmin in there or a mid-level Rolex?
I'd go for the mid-level Rolex.
I knew it. I knew it straight away. So amazing. Well, thank you very, very much for coming on.
I appreciate it.
It's been really good having you on, and it's been a pleasure getting to meet you through everything. And I look forward to the many High Rock sessions where we're in the pits together. But to you guys listening, to find the podcast on all of the different social media channels, it's at mindsets_podcast. That goes for YouTube as well. You can find us on there. Please do subscribe to all of the content as it comes through. Like and share as much as you can so that we can get more stories like this and get more advice out to those that really need it. And also allows me to get more and more people involved in the podcast as well. So it's a deeply exciting time. There's things going on in my personal life which are changing, and I will share those and they will come to fruition soon. But ultimately, I think things are about to kick into another gear, which is really cool. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next episode.